Today, we are diving into one of the most incredible revolutions in all of human history. And no, it wasn't a war fought with swords and shields for territory. It was a battle for the nature of reality itself. It all went down in ancient Greece, and it completely changed the way we think about the universe and our place inside of it.
So here's the big question we're tackling. How in the world did we go from explaining everything with stories about gods and monsters to explaining it with human reason, logic, and evidence? That's the journey we're going on today.
Okay, so to really get this massive shift, we first have to picture the world before philosophy came along. It was a world totally shaped by epic poems, by grand divine stories. Think of poets like Homer. They weren't just entertainers. They were the source of truth about how the universe began and how it all worked.
Now, this worldview, it has a name, Mythos. It's a reality built on amazing stories, on faith, and on the authority of poets who were believed to be divinely inspired. And you have to understand, this was a powerful and really a complete way of making sense of everything, from why the seasons change to what happens after you die.
But then, something entirely new starts to bubble up, and it was called Logos. Instead of looking up to the heavens for answers, Logos turned inward, to the human mind. This new way of thinking relied on reason, on arguments that had to be logical, and on evidence that you could actually show to someone and debate.
So what we're talking about here is a huge change in where truth comes from. See, mythos is handed down from on high, from a divine authority. You don't question it, you accept it. But logos, well, logos has to be built, piece by piece, through human questioning and argument. This is the moment we go from just believing to actually investigating.
But why Greece? I mean, of all places, why there? Well, this incredible leap forward was no accident. It was actually the product of a really unique mix of social, economic, and political circumstances that created the perfect petri dish for a whole new way of thinking. And right at the heart of it all was the Greek Pólis, the city-state. Because Greece is so mountainous, all these little communities grew up pretty much on their own, each one independent. And this created a brand new kind of public space, a new center for human life, and, this is the key part, for public debate.
And it wasn't just one thing, it was a whole cocktail of changes happening all at once. You had sailors going on these long voyages, and they came back and said, hey, you know those sea monsters on the maps? Yeah, they're not there. Myths started to crumble. Then you have the invention of coinage, which forced people to think abstractly about what value even is. The alphabet they used, which was phonetic, moved the mind away from thinking in little pictures to thinking in abstract symbols. But the biggest one? The new politics of the polis. In the town square, the Agra, laws had to be written down, debated, and defended with rational arguments, not just because a god said so.
And so, out of this incredible melting pot of new ideas, a new kind of person steps onto the stage. They weren't priests, they weren't poets, they were something completely different. They were the very first philosophers.
You know, the word they came up with, philosophia, it tells you everything you need to know. It comes from philo, which means love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. Legend has it that the thinker Pythagoras came up with it. He said he wasn't a wise man, a sophos, because only the gods could truly possess wisdom. He was just a philosopher, a lover of wisdom. His whole mission was the chase, the pursuit of truth, not the claim that he already had it.
So, what was this grand quest all about? Well, these first philosophers were obsessed with one single monumental question. They wanted to find the arche. The arche is the one single underlying natural thing from which everything else in the entire universe comes from. They were literally looking for the source code of reality.
All right, so with this mission in mind, find the arche. These early thinkers, who we now call the pre-socratics, they started throwing out some answers. And their ideas were absolutely revolutionary, precisely because they were so simple and so completely natural.
And the guy who gets the credit for firing the starting pistol is Thales of Miletus. In fact, centuries later, Aristotle would look back and call Thales the very first physicist, someone who studies physis, or nature.
So, Thales' big answer to the ultimate question of everything was water. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds kind of simple, right? But you have to understand, this was a conceptual explosion. For the very first time in history, someone suggested that the ultimate principle of all things wasn't a god, it wasn't some myth, it was a single, observable, natural thing. The sheer audacity of that is just wow. He was saying that the secret to nature was to be found inside nature itself.
Right on Thales' heels was his student, Anaximander.
and he pushed this new way of thinking even further into the abstract. I mean, look at this map, which they say he created. It's a perfect example of what they were doing, trying to rationally model the world, to make it understandable, instead of just telling stories about it.
And Anaximander's idea for the arche was way more abstract than water. He called it the apeiron, which means something like the unlimited or the indefinite. It wasn't a specific thing you could point to, it was this eternal, boundless stuff that all the opposites we see in the world, like hot and cold or wet and dry, come out of and eventually go back into. And get this, Anaximander was the very first person we know of to even use the word arche for this kind of principle.
So now that people are using reason to figure things out, it was only a matter of time before they started to disagree. And boy, did they. The first huge debate in philosophy kicks off, and it's a question that goes right to the very heart of reality. Is the universe all about constant, endless change, or is true reality actually permanent and unchanging?
In one corner, you've got Heraclitus. He argued that everything is in flux. Reality is a process of constant change. For him, being is always becoming something new. And in the other corner, you have Parmenides. He argued that, nope, true reality, what he just called being, has to be eternal, whole, and completely static. All that change we think we see with our eyes, he said it's just an illusion.
Heraclitus sums up his entire worldview in this one brilliant metaphor. Think about it. The river looks like the same river, but the water flowing in it is always new. For him, everything is like that river, in a state of constant transformation. The universe is just this dynamic, fiery process of change.
Parmenides went in the complete opposite direction. He relied only on pure, cold logic. He basically said, look, you can only think about something that is. You can't actually think about nothing or what is not. It's impossible. So if that's true, then being must be eternal because it could never have not been. Any kind of change would mean something went from being to not being. And his logic said that was impossible. So our reason tells us reality is permanent, even if our senses are screaming that everything is changing.
Now, to back up this wild idea, Parmenides' student Zeno created these incredible brain teasers called paradoxes. The most famous one goes like this. To get to any destination, you have to first travel half the distance, right? And then you have to travel half of the remaining distance, and then half of that remaining distance, and so on, forever. You can keep dividing it in half an infinite number of times. The mind-bending conclusion? Logically, you can never actually arrive, so the motion we see must be an illusion.
Look, whether you're Team Heraclitus or Team Parmenides, that's almost not the most important part. The truly crucial point is that the questions themselves and the fact that they were being argued with logic instead of myths meant that a completely new way of thinking had been born.
These early thinkers gave us the revolutionary idea that the universe wasn't just some random stage for gods to play on, but an ordered cosmos, one that could actually be understood by the human mind. They were the first to look for universal principles within nature, not from some force outside of it. And they kicked off that critical, ongoing debate between what things seem to be to our senses and what they really are according to our reason. They literally laid the foundation for all of Western science and philosophy to come.
And that leaves us with a pretty deep question that started way back then and is still with us today. If our senses can be tricked by something as basic as motion, if logic can show that something we see every single day is impossible, then what else about the reality we experience might just be an illusion? What's actually real, and how can we ever know for sure?